Well, on to some serious matters now. Eskom customers will have to dig deep into their pockets from the 1st of April this year to pay for electricity, and that is no April Fool's joke. The National Energy Regulator of South Africa has approved a 12.7% increase in Eskom's electricity tariffs for the 2025-2026 financial year. And this hike is significantly lower than Eskom's original request of 36.1% for the upcoming year. The electricity tariff increases will be followed by further hikes of 5.36% for 2026-2027 and 6.19% for the 27-2028 financial year. But to help us unpack Nersa's decision, we are joined virtually now by independent energy analyst Clyde Mallinson. Clyde, so good to see you again. Welcome to Morning Live.
Morning, good to be back. Would have preferred to be in the studio, but what can you do?
Yeah, as long as we have you in one way or another. Now, Clyde, looking at what Nersa ultimately approved, that increase of 12.7% for the 2025-2026 financial year, well below the 36% which was requested by Eskom. What is your assessment of that whole situation?
There's so many levels one needs to address this on. And I think the first level to start on is affordability for those who can't afford electricity. This is always where I like to start. And so it was said during the adjudication or the announcement of the tariff increases that Nersa was protecting those who couldn't afford electricity by reducing the requested increase of 36% down to, let's call it 13%, 12.7. It was an act to shield the poor, as it were, and those who can't afford. Now, the truth of the matter is people can't afford electricity at its current price before those increases come in. There's something like 11 million households who live in what is referred to as energy poverty, where they're having to make daily decisions between electricity and food. And the implication during the announcement of the tariffs was that Nersa was protecting that from happening. But the truth of the matter is it's already happening. And a 12.5% increase is actually about threefold current inflation. So whereas it wasn't 36%, 12.5% it's just not affordable to those 10, 11 million households in energy poverty. That to me is the biggest takeaway. The second thing is that both Eskom and Nersa use the same methodology to come up with the so-called allowable increases. It's a fairly complex thing. I won't go into too much detail, but Eskom says how much revenue they need and what their expected sales are, and then they just divide the revenue by sales to come up with an actual tariff. And both Nersa and Eskom use the same methodology. Now, I'm not sure how Eskom, using the same methodology as Nersa, can come to the conclusion that they need a 36% increase, and Nersa can come to the conclusion that they need a 12.7% increase, using the same sort of matrix, if you like. So these are complete disconnect or breakdown in the way in which the tariffs are increased. A third point, Eskom are going to get about 60 billion less in this first year than they requested. But in the second year, they're going to get about 85 billion less than they requested. And in the third year, 100 billion less than they requested. And the reason those numbers go up like that, although the increases come down from 12.7 to 6 to 5, is that the base at which they start, if they don't get the 36 in the first year, then what they were requesting in the second year, there's a bigger gap, and the third year, a bigger gap still. So essentially, over the 3 years, Eskom are going to get about R250 billion less than what they asked for. The implications of that I haven't even started to imagine. And then you've probably got more questions, but I wanted to just slip one more thing in. the Auditor General, looking at the Eskom accounts, noted that Eskom themselves have said that there's 1.8 million people who are buying fraudulent tokens for prepaid electricity. And Chris Yelland, I think it was, worked out that Eskom, through that, were losing about 27 billion a year. And apparently, the only way you can get access to generating fraudulent token numbers is if you've got contacts somewhere high up in Eskom where they have access to this kind of information. So it doesn't mean people aren't paying for electricity. They're buying tokens from people who have fraudulently created the tokens, who are then taking that money. So somewhere out there, these people splitting 27 billion amongst themselves, and that's just a shocker.
And it's that, and then you also have the illegal connections. And you look at these tariff increases, Clyde, and you look at Eskom's latest results that were declared, and the balance sheet seems to be looking better. But to what extent are these increases also driving that upward mobility? Because, as you say, at the expense of the consumers who, through no fault of their own in the main, are having to foot the bill for what's happening at Eskom.
Yeah, I think if you added that 27 billion to what is known or thought to be due to non-payment and theft, I'm sure you get to the numbers that Nersa has shaved off of what Eskom's asking for. I think it would be quite a close match. Couple of other things of note is Eskom requested funding for carbon tax in anticipation of carbon, and Nersa disallowed that. Now, that can't be. There needs to be clarity between these government bodies. Will Eskom pay carbon tax or won't they? And if carbon tax comes in, will Eskom have to pay it? Presumably to then claim it back from the customers, which is why they were wanting to increase the tariff. Or is there not going to be carbon tax? Or are Eskom expected to carry the burden of carbon tax without passing it on to the consumer? So I just don't like that disconnect in the matrix. The matrix says carbon tax. Eskom puts in an amount. Nersa says, no, it's naught. Well, which one is it? It can't be both of them. So it's kind of binary.
There's still a lot to work through. And then, of course, there are other cost factors for Eskom, like the cost of coal, that they have factored in also with quite a significant increase, around 10%. So things like that, which, of course, was also reviewed. But let's look at that. Let's look at the renewables that are meant to come online, on stream as well. Are we going to pay for all of that going forward, and for how long, along with all of the inefficiencies that come along with everything?
Yeah, so the renewable one is an interesting one because the first rounds of renewable electricity were quite expensive and essentially subsidized, if you like. But the cost of renewables now in the latest bid windows are on a par or lower than what Eskom's variable cost is. And the problem is that when Eskom buys power from renewables, it's buying the whole package. It's buying the electricity from the renewables, but it's not having to put management teams in place to look after those renewable facilities. It's not having to do the operation and maintenance of the renewables. So as the output from Eskom decreases because they're bringing in, let's call it the whole package of renewables where they don't have to maintain and look after those renewables, there should be a commensurate reduction, certainly in the elements of Eskom that have to do with generation, not necessarily transmission and distribution, obviously, because you're still having to transmit and distribute. But surely as the generation from Eskom decreases, the staffing levels at all levels, the head office, the actual operation, and we haven't seen that happen. We've seen a prolonging of some of these assets where all the staff are still there, and so you can't do that. If you're buying half or a quarter or whatever it is from somewhere else, and you're not generating that yourself anymore, surely you need to then look at your overheads and your costs related to generation.
Yeah, we have literally 30 seconds, Clyde, but I quickly want to ask you, if we look at these price hikes, do they present a significant threat to Eskom? Could more customers be thinking of finding alternative energy sources and abandoning Eskom?
Look, I've done a lot of studies. You can't easily abandon Eskom, but you can supplant what you're purchasing from Eskom. So municipalities, for example, can very easily, inside the meter, as it were, supply themselves with 60% of renewable energy from solar and storage, which would mean they would then only buy 40% of what they're currently buying from Eskom. So yes, that's already viable, and it's now more viable than it was yesterday before we heard these price increases.
Well, Clyde Mallinson, thanks so much. Always a pleasure speaking to you. Clyde Mallinson, independent energy analyst, speaking about Eskom's price hike that's been approved for 2025, and just about 13% is what consumers will be paying more for electricity. That's also our question of the day. Let us know your thoughts at Morning Live SABC.